Proverbs 25 and 26. Proverbs 25 verses 21 and 22 read this way: If your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat, and if he is thirsty, give him water to drink. For so you shall heap coals of fire on his head, and the Lord will reward you. How do we know what heaping coals of fire on someone's head means? This is a good example of, well, we kind of go one of two directions often when we read the Bible. We say, oh, I got this, I understand what it means, and we move on. Other times like this one, we just stop and catch ourselves and say, oh, I have no idea what this means, and we go looking for help. And by the way, that's a good reason, again, to own good study Bibles. I would have 3 or 4 if I could. Commentaries, those probably more specific. Bible dictionaries are very helpful. In general, I found that reading cultural and historical background books are the best thing for understanding the Bible. The Archaeological Study Bible I've really found helpful for its study notes. In fact, here's what it says about the background of heaping coals. Heaping burning coals upon a person's head was a horrific punishment for the wicked in the ancient world. Here, however, the picture could have been one of kindness. Though painful, the consequence might have served to win the individual over, that is, to cause repentance. So this is a good example again of how the writer is looking back to something that, well, he knew in Torah, that you need to be kind to people, and he's spinning it into a proverb that isn't just saying be kind to people. It's putting a spin on it to where you stop and say, well, that's kind of backwards, or that's going beyond the pale, or whatever, even this heaping coals of fire. And he's basically having fun with the idea. He's being creative, but that's the point of a proverb, is to take a do and a don't and spin it into a fun, creative thought that you go away from not forgetting. So that's a good example of that in Proverbs 25. All right, what I'd like to do is then, as we get close to the end of Proverbs, is to think ahead how the book of Proverbs will play out in the story of Israel from here. We will see people like, let's use, and these are just examples, but Rehoboam. He is the son of Solomon. Again, the principle of a proverb is, if you want people to remember what you said, then creatively spin some kind of word picture that they walk away not forgetting. And Rehoboam will be asked, are you going to be harder on us than Solomon when it comes to taxation and slavery? The people of Israel will ask, and Rehoboam says it this way. This is in 1 Kings 12. And now, whereas my father put a heavy yoke on you, I will add to your yoke. My father chastened you with whips. I will chastise you with scourges. Some versions have scorpions. So again, the point is, he wanted to be remembered, and he takes a normal statement and flips it and creatively causes the person to go, whoa, I can't forget that one. Coming up, we'll have 2 prophets farther down the road in the story, Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Again, the story there will be, because of the exile, the people will be blaming their forefathers for the problem. And Jeremiah and Ezekiel both have this statement, Jeremiah 31, Ezekiel 18. In those days they shall no longer say, the fathers have eaten sour grapes, and the children's teeth are set on edge. See the point of proverbially blaming your father for your own teeth being set on edge. And both prophets say, don't blame your fathers for what has happened to you. Farther down the way, of course, even into the New Testament, I really want to recommend that Jesus will be the proverbial speaker par excellence. In fact, here is where we have to remember that mashal is a Hebrew term that is translated into proverb. It's a mashal. But the word parable in Hebrew is also the same word. In other words, there is no distinction in the Hebrew mind, in the Hebrew language, between a parable and a proverb. Now, usually in English, we take Jesus to be speaking in proverbs, like those short, pithy things like, how can Satan cast out Satan? That's just a quick proverbial witticism of Jesus. But then the next thing we hear Jesus say is, a sower went forth to sow, and you get a whole story. Well, and then we call that a a parable. Just understand that in the ancient language, that's the same thing. Whether Jesus speaks a sentence or an entire story, it's a figure of speech in language, and it will fall under the idea of a proverb. Now, one more, and here's where, again, when we get there, I'm just predicting, because we're getting close to the New Testament, closer and closer, right? So I'll be talking more and more about how this applies into the New Testament story. When we get to someone like Paul, I have found that traditionally it's easy to kind of bracket him off in our minds and say, okay, thank you for the story, Bible, but now I have my theologian. Now I have someone who's putting it all together for me. And we tend to keep Paul as a separate look upon the meaning of the story of the Bible. I'd recommend we take this bracket off and we think in terms of Paul coming along the same story and being one of the many writers and storytellers of the Bible telling exactly the same story. What I mean by that is there'll be times that Paul will just repeat a proverb. Romans 12:20. If your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him drink, for in so doing you heap coals of fire on his head. Paul repeats that proverb, and I'd recommend he means the same thing by it. Then we also have something like 2 Corinthians 9, verse 6. He who sows sparingly shall also reap sparingly. He who sows bountifully will reap. He who sows bountifully will reap bountifully. That's a development, kind of an elongation of a common idea that what you reap or what you sow, you reap. He uses this in the story of the Corinthian giving patterns for how they've been helping him. So again, that is still a proverbial statement, and I would not read it in any other way than a proverbial statement. If God is for us, who can be against us? Romans 8:31. Notice how he takes a theological truth and spins it into a proverb. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. That is a proverbial, almost a parabolic, because again, the way the stories work, a parabolic statement, but it's just a personalized way of taking a personal story and putting it into parabolic form. But when that which is perfect has come, then that which is in part will be done away. 1 Corinthians 13:10. Again, we often take that to be a theological truth about something. I would say Paul is simply making a proverbial statement about truth in general. When the sun comes up, turn out the lights. When the perfect thing shows up, the partial things can go away. So that would be an example, again, of where Paul, often taken theologically, I just think he means to be taken proverbially.